السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله على إحسانه وشكر له على تفضله وامتنانه، ولا إله إلا الله تعظيما لشأنه، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله داعي إلى رضوانه وعلى آله وأصحابه وإخوانه. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, we are continuing our lecture series regarding the death and the grave. Tonight, inshallah, we shall look at the grave. Why did some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the likes of Uthman ibn Affan, why did they consider the grave to be the scariest or the most horrifying stage of the hereafter? Tonight we shall be looking at the grave and the fitna in the grave. Ikhwani fillah, Hani, the freed slave of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, he sees Uthman radiallahu anhu every time that he is standing next to a grave, Uthman starts crying. Every single time Uthman radiallahu anhu stands next to a grave, he starts crying. So Hani asks him, when you think or remember or you talk about Jannah and Nar, you never cry. But whenever you talk about the grave, you always cry. Why is this? Why is it you do not cry about Jannah and Nar, but you cry about the grave? He said, Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu, Inna al-qabra awwalu manzila min manazil akhirah. He says that the grave is the very first stage in the hereafter. That is stage number one. Then he continues, he says, فَإِن نَجَى مِنْهُ فَمَا بَعْدَهُ أَيْسَرَ مِنْهُ. Whoever is saved or is okay in the grave, everything that comes thereafter will be easy. Then he continues, he says, وَإِن لَمْ يَنْجُهُ مِنْهُ فَمَا بَعْدَهُ أَشَدُّ مِنْهُ. And whoever has a difficult time in the grave, whatever comes thereafter will be more difficult. Hence, Uthman used to cry when he comes to a grave. Because this stage of the grave, if it's easy for you in the grave, everything, the day of judgment, walking over the sirat, all those things that we shall look thereafter, it's easy. But if you have difficulty in the grave, everything thereafter will be more difficult. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, مَا رَأَيْتُ مَنْظَرًا قَطْ إِلَّا وَالْقَبْرَ أَفْضَعْ مِنْهُ. I've never seen any sight except that the grave is more horrifying. The grave is more scary than that thing, than anything. That's the most scary thing the Prophet ﷺ says he's witnessed. The believer, when he's kept in the grave and he sees the na'im, the blessings that is kept in the grave, he says, Rabbil ajjil qiyam sa'a. Oh Allah, I want the day of Qiyamah to be established so that I can meet my family, I can go back to my property and my dealings. As for the kafir, the munafiq, despite all the pain and all the difficulty and the trouble they're going through in the grave, they say, Rabbi la tuqim sa'a. Oh Allah, do not bring the day of judgment to come. We are okay to be punished in the grave. Because everything for the kafir after the grave is more difficult. And for the believer, it's even easier and more blessed. So point number one, ikhwani fillah, the grave is very scary. The grave is horrifying. That's why the Prophet ﷺ tells us that you always remember هَذِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ, the thing that you shall take away all your desires. All your pleasures will go when you're kept in that grave. Point number two, ikhwani fillah. The Prophet ﷺ, at his time, there was a black woman who was cleaning the mosque. So she cleans the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, this dark lady. Then one day the Prophet ﷺ does not find her. He asks his companions, what happened to that lady who was cleaning the mosque? They say, she died at night. We did not want to disturb you. We did for her the Salat al-Janazah and we buried her at night. The Prophet ﷺ says to the Sahaba, show me the grave of that woman. So he goes ﷺ and he makes dua and he prays for the people of that grave and more particularly this woman. Then he says ﷺ, إِنَّ هَذِهِ الْقُبُورِ مَمْلُوءَةٌ ظُلْمَةً عَلَى أَهْلِهَا. These graves are filled with darkness with the people who occupy it. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ And indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ينورها لهم بالصلاة عليهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings light to these graves because of my dua for them. So ikhwani fillah, the point number 2 is the grave is very dark. And the only thing that gives the people of the grave a lot of happiness is when you go visit them and you make dua for them. For that dua, if Allah accepts it, Allah will make it light in the graves. So make it often that you go to the graves wherever they are in your town, in your city, and you visit the people in the grave and you make dua for them. Not only your relatives, but for all the Muslims who are buried there. That is number 2. Number 3, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that every single person who dies, the grave will squeeze them. Every single person, young or old, rich or poor, righteous or evil, shall be squeezed in the grave at least once. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, إن للقبر ضغطة لو كان أحد ناجا منها نجا سعد بن معاذ. He says that the grave has a pressure, or it has a squeeze. If anyone was to have been saved from that squeeze, it would have been the Sahabi Sa'd bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. Ikhwani fillah, who is this Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu? This man, he died after the battle of Ahzab. And when he died, Ikhwani fillah, the arsh, the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shook. Number 2, 70,000 angels were present in his janazah. 70,000 angels were present in the janazah of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, this is the one who the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shook upon his death. And the heavens were opened, and 70,000 of the angels attended his burial. لَقَدْ ضُمَّ ضَمَّةً ثُمَّ فُرْجَ عَنْهُ. He was squeezed once, then he was let go. Everyone in the grave shall be squeezed once, and your ribs will come together. Even the children. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, if anyone was to have been saved from the squeezing of the grave, it will have been this young child. No one is going to be saved from the squeezing of the grave. The grave will squeeze everyone. And if you're a believer, ثُمَّ مَدَّ الْبَصَرِ, your grave shall be made as large or as wide as your eyes can see, and bright because of your a'mal, and also bright because of the dua that the believers do for you. So point number 1, ikhwani fillah, the grave is horrifying. And Uthman radiallahu anhu used to cry every time he goes to the graves. Unlike many of us who sometimes make stories or laugh at the graveyard. Number 2, the grave is very dark. The grave is very dark. Sometimes, wallahi, I'm in the business sometimes of real estate. Then I see how we fight sometimes, or we rush over half acre, 1/8 of an acre, 1 acre. We always do land deals. Then you go to Langata. You've just left half an acre somewhere. You go to Langata and you see the land that's actually your home. That is the home that you're prepared for. One day, one of the kings of Saudi Arabia, he comes to the Imam, Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymin. He says, "Ya Imam, you are the greatest, one of the greatest scholars in the world. Do you have a house? Let me build for you a house." The Sheikh says, "عندي بيت في الصالحية. I have a house in Salihiyah." Oh, okay. The king lives. The students ask him, "Oh, Sheikh, what is this house in Salihiyah you're talking about? Do you have a second wife, or what's the story? Where is this house?" He says, "What is in Salihiyah? The graveyards. That is the house that I'm preparing for, and that is why I'm taking all these durus and all these lectures. That is our true houses. These houses we're fighting for 20 million shillings, 30 million shillings, 100 million shillings is what will go. That graveyard, that is, I measured it once. It's at least 2 meters by half a meter. That's 1 square meter. 1 square meter. And that is what matters to us most, and that is what we should prepare for. A place that is dark, horrifying, and every single person shall be squeezed in the grave. The next point, ikhwani fillah, is that there is something called fitnatul qabr. Fitnatul qabr. Fitnatul qabr. We shall be asked questions in the grave. In the grave there are 2 things, fitnatul qabr and adhabul qabr. Fitnatul qabr are the questions we shall be asked in the grave. And this is the last exam or the last test we have as believers. And there's the adhab al-qabr, the punishment that shall befall some people in the grave. So the fitnah al-qabr, when a person is kept in the grave, let's start with the believers. 2 angels shall come. These 2 angels are scary, completely harsh. They come to you in the grave and they sit you up. Their names are, what are the names? Talha, Munkar and Nakir. Munkar and Nakir. Angels are blue and black in color. Aswadani azraqani. That's what the hadith says. Blue and black. Munkar and Nakir. They sit you up. Then they say to you, Man Rabbuk, who is your Lord? The Muslim, easy. He says, Rabbi Allah. My Lord is Allah. Ma dinuk, what is your religion? Din al-Islam. My religion is Islam. فَمَاذَا تَقُولُ فِي هَذَا الرَّجُلَ الَّذِي بُعِثَ فِيكُمْ? What do you say about this man who was sent to you? They say, we bear witness, he is the prophet of Allah and his messenger. For the believer, those 3 questions go very quickly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the believer a firm word in the grave, in the time of dying, by saying La ilaha illallah, and also in the grave when he's asked those 3 questions. And this is the last fitna that shall befall the person in the grave. In a different hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that this fitna, this trial, is the same level as the fitna of the Masih al-Dajjal. The Masih al-Dajjal, as we mentioned in the previous lectures, is the greatest fitna to befall this earth from the time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam until the day of judgment. Every single prophet warned their people about the fitna of the Masih al-Dajjal. So the believer, it's easy. As for the kafir, he says, Man Rabbuk? He says, La adri, I do not know. He says, Ma dinuk? La adri. He says, Man nabiyuk? Who's your prophet? ماذا تقول في هذا الرجل الذي بعث فيكم? What do you say about this man that was sent to you? Huh? He's given an answer. Muhammad. What are you saying about Muhammad? He says, I had people saying things about him and I spoke similarly. The angels say to him, La darayta wa la talawt. You will never know and you never recited. And a caller will call from the heavens, and كذب abdi, my servant lived the life of a lie. My servant lived the life of a lie. As for the munafiq, the hypocrite, is asked, Man Rabbuk? Says, la adri. He does, I don't know. Man nabiyuk? Who is your prophet? He says, Ma dinuk? La adri. I do not know. I do not know. Says, ماذا تقول في هذا الرجل الذي بعث فيكم? What do you say about this man that was sent to you? He says, La adri. So this is the fitnat al-qabr. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, when a servant of Allah is kept in the grave and his companions leave him, that servant of Allah can hear the footsteps of his colleagues leaving. So you have kept your brother in the grave. Once you leave, that person hears your footsteps going away and is alone. In that loneliness, he is alone. Then the 2 angels, the most scary of angels he has seen perhaps to date, they come and they sit him up and they ask him these questions. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, seek protection from the punishment of the grave, seek protection from adhab al-qabr. A question that the scholars were asking, is the disbeliever questioned in his grave? Is the kafir asked those 3 questions in the grave? The scholars have differed upon this, but the correct opinion, as is the opinion of the majority of the scholars, is that they shall be questioned. No one shall be absolved from this, from the disbelievers. Type. Another question, and it's the final question, are the children, are they going to be asked these questions in the grave? The scholars have said that every person who is mukallaf, who has sins written for him, shall be questioned in the grave, except for the prophets, for we do not know, or the scholars differed upon the prophets. And also the shuhada, the one who died fighting fi sabilillah, shaheed will not be asked any question in the grave. It is sufficient for him, the first sword that was hit him, the sight of that sword was enough of a fitna for him, as mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ. So the shuhada will not be asked. The murabitun, the ones who protect the borders of the Muslims from being attacked by the enemies of Islam, shall not be asked any question in the grave. The shuhada, the murabitun, these ones they will never be asked. But the children and the people who are mentally sick, shall they be asked questions in the grave? Who knows the answer? Where are the scholars? Who says, yes, who says they'll be asked questions, the children and the majanin, the people who are mentally sick? Who says they will not be asked? Right hand. Taib. The scholars have differed like you. So you're scholars, mashallah. So the first opinion, the scholars, they say that the fitnatul qabr will be for the people who have reached the age of being written for sins or thawab. As for the people who the pen has been lifted from, they shall not be asked any single question. This is the opinion of some of the scholars. Others of the scholars, they say, when a child dies, you make salatul janazah for them, or you don't. But you make dua for the parent. But also from the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Allahumma qiya adhab al-qabr wa fitnat al-qabr. Oh Allah, protect this young child who's passed away from the punishment of the grave and from the fitna of the grave. If the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith made dua for these young children to be protected from adhab al-qabr and fitnat al-qabr, it means that is a possibility for them or not? Have you understood the evidence? Or I repeat. The Prophet ﷺ, when he says, Oh Allah, protect this child who has passed away from the punishment of the grave and from the fitna of the grave. Is there any meaning to that dua except that that child will be held or asked questions in the grave? Yes. No. From the adab al-qabr and the fitnat al-qabr, that means they are liable for some kind of responsibility. Yes, so they shall be asked questions on the grave, otherwise there will be no meaning to this dua. Most of the scholars, they say on the day of judgment, the children shall be given an exam. They shall be given an exam. And if they pass this exam, they shall enter Jannah. And if they fail, they will not enter Jannah, especially the children of the non-Muslims. What will happen to them? This is an issue the scholars have differed upon. And another opinion, of course, it says that these children shall be under the care of Nabiullah Ibrahim alayhi salam. Or these children will be your servants in the hereafter. So, Ikhwani fillah, we conclude our lecture by reminding each other, number one, the grave is very horrifying. Seek always protection when you're doing at-tahiyyat, the last part of the tashahud. Seek protection from Allah to save you from the fitnat al-qabr and adhab al-qabr. And you have known the difference between fitnat al-qabr and adhab al-qabr. Fitna is the questions. The adhab is the punishment. Number two, the grave is very dark. If you want light in your grave, your deeds will assist you. If you want light in your graves, have these good brothers who shall make dua for you. Like the great hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radhiyallahu anhu, one of the greatest hadiths, when the believers, they enter Jannah. They pass the Sirat and they have entered Jannah. The first thing they do, or from amongst the first things they do, they look behind. Then they see, so and so is not with us. Our brother so and so is not with us. They say, Oh Allah, where are our brothers? Where is Fulan, Fulan and Fulan? They start mentioning some of our names that were here or other places. Allah says, those people are in the hellfire. The believers, they say, Oh Allah, we will not get true happiness in Jannah until you remove our brothers from the hellfire. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to them, اذهبوا فمن وجدتم في قلب مثقال حبة من إيمان فأخرجوه. Go to the hellfire. Whoever you find from the believers, from your brothers, from your companions, they have even an atom weight of iman, remove them from the hellfire. So the believers go to the hellfire and they remove their brothers and their sisters. Then there remain others. Oh Allah, please, also those ones. Allah tells them, go remove them. Even if they have minute, very small iman, remove them from hellfire. So the believers go back and go back and go back, and they remove their fellow brothers. So Ikhwani fillah, yes, it's not very good always to mix with people, but it's always very good to have sincere brothers who will make dua for you. Every time you've gone, we've lost some of our elders in this mosque. The only thing we can do for them right now is we make dua for them or we make sadaqah for them. How many people have you lost in the last 2 years just in this mosque? But you are your brothers. The same way you want the Muslims to make dua for you, make dua for your brothers who have passed away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us knowledge in our deen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.